This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. My name is Rocky. In order to gather enough money for my mother's surgery, I had to work part-time as a male model at a bar. There, I met a gentle, wealthy woman named Hailey. "What are you standing there for?" Hailey paused as she opened the door, glancing at me briefly. I awkwardly adjusted my coat, which cost me just a few dozen bucks, hesitated for a moment, and followed her into the elegantly decorated mansion in front of me. "Do you know why I brought you here?" Hailey changed her shoes and leaned back on the sofa, eyeing me with a slightly scrutinizing gaze. I tightened the hem of my clothes, feeling extremely nervous, but still forced myself to reply that I knew. Hailey tilted her chin and said nothing more. In fact, including today, I had only known Hailey for about 5 days. She had always been a client of another colleague. It was only because my colleague was sick and took a leave that the job of serving her fell to me. The bar where I worked part-time was a private one. The patrons were either rich or aristocratic, and sometimes their tips could amount to most of my month's salary. This was why, even though I knew Hailey's intention of taking me home, I couldn't refuse. I was desperately in need of money. I would do anything for it. After preparing myself mentally, I took a deep breath and walked to Hailey, kneeling on one knee on the carpet, gently rubbing her palm. "Sister, I don't know what to do," I said with a trembling voice. After all, as a lifelong single person, I had no idea how to please someone like her. I had only briefly searched for information on how to act obedient and compliant just before getting into the car. I looked up at the powerful Hailey in front of me, feeling an inexplicable sense of retreat. Can I really do this well? Hailey's features were striking, from her arched eyebrows to her upturned lips. Each part of her face seemed to be blessed by heaven. Her tall, slender figure and fair skin made her look like the type of alluring, dominant woman that could make someone fall for her at first sight. At that moment, she looked down at me with her eyes half closed. Her slightly upturned eyes were tinged with a delicate pink, yet her aura made her beauty appear somewhat sharp, making her look unapproachable. Indeed, after hearing my words, Hailey furrowed her brows slightly. "Can't even kiss properly?" "Yes, I can, sister," I replied quickly. I dared not say more, glancing at her face briefly, then cautiously placed a gentle kiss on the corner of her lips. "You're useless. Can't even do this right?" To my surprise, Hailey looked even angrier, pushing me away with some impatience, and walked straight into the room without looking back, leaving me alone, bewildered in the spot. From the beginning, I knew that Hailey came to the bar to hunt for excitement. She was interested in my colleague who worked part-time with me. The manager said that Hailey had been coming to the bar for 2 months, always requesting only him for service. But my colleague, always arrogant, felt that Hailey's actions were an insult to his dignity, so he never treated her well. It was a coincidence that Hailey planned to confess her feelings that day, but that colleague took sick leave. The prepared venue and gifts naturally fell into my hands. When Hailey came to the bar as usual, for some reason, she had a big argument with my colleague, and then in front of him, Hailey asked if I wanted to go home with her. In a moment of impulse, I agreed. Looking back now, with my colleague's sullen face and Hailey's mocking tone, it's clear I became a pawn in their game. But with money as the priority, who cares about dignity? Realizing this, I quickly composed my expression, walked to Hailey's door, and gently knocked. Upon receiving permission, I pushed the door open. Hailey had just taken a shower, lazily sitting at the edge of the bed. Only when she heard the noise did she slowly turn her head to look at me. "Do you know how now?" Yes, I do." I swallowed hard, walking to her cautiously, this time not hesitating. I gently embraced Hailey's waist and kissed her. Although my technique was poor, at least Hailey didn't push me away, only letting out a soft hum. This was a good sign. Encouraged, I felt like I was on cloud 9 and hugged her tightly without any guidance. The next day at work, I clearly felt that all my colleagues looked at me strangely. Before I could ask, Jack, who usually got along well with me, pulled me into the changing room. "Rocky, maybe you should take a day off today," Jack said quietly. "What's wrong?" I asked, puzzled. Was the manager in a bad mood today? It wasn't unheard of. Once, a few colleagues were caught smoking in the restroom during work hours, and the manager fired them without a word. For more than half a month, he had been reprimanding us angrily. It was understandable. The guests here were all high profile, and if an employee's mistake led to any dissatisfaction from the guests, it wouldn't be resolved by just firing someone. Jack, however, looked at me oddly. "Did you leave with Miss Hailey last night?" I was taken aback but nodded. There were quite a few people present. I didn't think it could be hidden. Exactly. Who doesn't know that Miss Hailey is interested in Tony? He and Hailey have been clearly flirting. You got involved, and now Tony will definitely hold a grudge against you. Jack spoke with conviction. "It's fine now, but if he succeeds, you'll be the one to suffer as a tool." As soon as Jack finished speaking, the changing room door was kicked open from outside. The topic of discussion, Tony, stood in the corridor with a gloomy face, glancing coldly at me. "During work hours. Not working, but gossiping here. Do you want to be fired? If you can work, then work. If you can't, then get lost." His somewhat meaningful gaze glanced at my neck. "Don't make that expression. It's disgusting." After saying that, he sneered in disdain. "Well, with someone like you, who only thinks about how to flatter women, how can you expect to have any backbone like a man?" His words were clearly mocking me, but I didn't feel offended. Thinking of the tip Hailey gave me this morning, enough to cover 2 courses of treatment for my mother, it was just a few sarcastic remarks. No big deal. I closed my eyes, forced a smile, and said, "Sorry, I was just handing over work with Jack. If the manager wants to deduct money, I'll tell him to deduct it from me." "Very generous." Tony sneered and left. I didn't say much to Jack, changed into my work uniform, and returned to my post. I don't know why, but I keep having a strange premonition. I always feel like Tony is targeting me. For instance, when I was delivering drinks to the guests as usual, he would be standing at the bar one moment, and then deliberately walk into me the next, bumping my shoulder and causing the drink to spill all over the floor. Or when I was cleaning up the booth after the guests left, he would find various excuses to come and make a mess, delaying my work progress. After tolerating this several times, I finally couldn't stand it anymore. "Tony, what exactly do you want?" He shot me a cold glance. "Supervising your work. Don't you see the floor is still full of sunflower seed shells? Get sweeping." I tightened my grip on the broom, about to argue that these were the messes he had made, when I suddenly heard a familiar voice from behind. "What's going on?" Hailey, arms crossed and leaning against the door frame, made my eyes light up. I was about to greet her, but Tony quickly stepped in front of her. "What are you doing here? Didn't you say you were going on a business trip today?" "Of course, I came to see you." Hailey, seemingly ignoring me, naturally linked her arm with Tony's and walked out the door together. Faintly, I heard her say to Tony, "Just yesterday we had a fight, and today you're so concerned about me? Are you jealous or feeling a crisis?" She smiled sweetly, resting her head on Tony's shoulder. "Don't worry, sister's heart is still with you. So, have you decided? Will you come home with sister?" They walked further and further away, until I could no longer hear any sound. I snapped back to reality, realizing that Hailey's target from the start had always been Tony. How could she possibly be here to care about me? I gave a self-deprecating smile. She must have heard about what happened today and came to comfort Tony. I was just a tool she used to provoke Tony, not worth anything at all. Yet, despite this, an indescribable bitterness spread in my heart. Since that day, I hadn't seen Hailey again. The few messages I received were inadvertently mentioned by Jack in our conversations. Either Hailey was out on a date with Tony, or she had spent more money on him. In short, all I heard were rumors about their affectionate relationship, but I pretended not to hear. When it was time to work, I worked like a madman. During my free time, I would call and chat with my mother. "I'll take good care of myself. Mom, you should also follow the doctor's advice and cooperate with the treatment. Don't worry about the money. I'll figure something out." During late night snack time, I ordered some food and hid in the stairwell, eating while video calling my mother. Every time I saw her condition improving, I felt all the hardships I endured were worth it. After chatting casually, seeing that it was getting late, I hurriedly reminded her to rest early and, with a resolute farewell, ended the call despite her reluctant gaze. As I was about to stand up, I was suddenly startled by a loud crash in the hallway. Peeking out, I saw Tony and Hailey, seemingly arguing about something. "Who cares about your lousy money?" Tony, with his neck stiff, kicked a fire extinguisher aside. "I'm not a gigolo like Rocky. Even if I had to beg, I wouldn't accept your high-handed charity." Tony pushed Hailey aside with a sullen face and walked away. As he passed me, he shot me a vicious glare. With his departure, the hallway fell silent again. Hailey looked up at me, her face hard to see clearly in the dim light. "I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose. I didn't know you two were here." I instinctively apologized for the awkwardness of stumbling upon their argument. "What are you doing here?" However, Hailey's tone was surprisingly calm, almost as if she hadn't just argued. "Aren't you still working?" "I'm on the early shift today. I can leave after my late-night snack," I explained. "I was just here talking to my mom on the phone. I didn't hear what you were talking about." As soon as I finished, I regretted it. Wasn't this like fleeing the scene of the crime? Hailey first nodded, then scrutinized me with narrowed eyes and asked, "Are you coming home with me today?" I was stunned but quickly reacted. "Why yes, but can you wait for me? I need to change out of my work uniform." Hailey still had little expression on her face and casually waved her hand. "I'll wait for you in the car." To my shock, I thought Hailey would take me back to that small villa like last time, but she drove toward a 5-star hotel in the city center. After swiping her card for the top-floor luxury presidential suite, she immediately pushed me into a dimly lit room. "I'm not in a good mood today. Let's play something different." Hailey didn't turn on the lights and handcuffed my hands with a pair of handcuffs she must have found somewhere. I nervously swallowed. Play what?" Hailey looked at me coldly, her voice filled with laziness and weariness, but with a mocking undertone. "Of course, play a game that will make me happy." She tilted my chin, forcing me to look up at her eyes. "You still have the right to refuse now." Hailey stared at me wordlessly, showing no emotion, but exuding an innate sense of pressure. My body involuntarily trembled, but I quickly firmed up and said, "I trust. Sister won't hurt me." Heh. Hailey let out a light laugh, and seeing my response, she said no more. "Walking into the bathroom first, then don't regret it. Go take a shower next door and come back." I never knew that behind Hailey's gentle facade was such profound violence and madness. In the end, I lost count of how many lashes I received, and I couldn't remember how many times I had barked like a dog on my knees. I only vaguely felt that Hailey was still venting her emotions on me, seemingly unsatisfied. I lowered my eyes, my body not yet recovered, but my mouth begged for mercy first. "Sister, it hurts." The last lash landed directly on my face, leaving a thin scar of blood. Although it didn't disfigure me, the burning pain made me whimper. "Be a good dog and get used to it." Hailey leaned down, gently brushing my cheek, with a look of tenderness in her eyes. "I'll try to be gentler." Her words were filled with suggestiveness and imagination, making me blush and stammer. I gritted my teeth, struggling to keep myself upright. "Is Sister's mood any better?" Hailey perfunctorily nodded. "I remember your name is Rocky, right? I heard you need money badly, so you stay with Sister?" Hailey smiled. "Little dogs like you who are so obedient are rare." My body stiffened suddenly as I pondered how to respond to this. Hailey's finger touched my lips. "I found out that you work part-time at the bar because your mother is ill. If you agree, Sister can find the best medical team to treat your mother." I was stunned and didn't react at all, my body remaining still. Hailey didn't hurry me, but patiently waited for my response. She seemed convinced I wouldn't refuse, and indeed, in the moment before her patience would run out, I slowly nodded. "I agree, good dog." The laughter above my head sounded like mockery, but I had nothing left to be ashamed of. Hailey kept her word. The next day, she arranged for my mother to be transferred to another hospital and paid for 3 years' worth of expenses in advance. This meant that for the next 3 years, I would be Hailey's property. The news spread quickly. The moment it reached Tony's ears, he couldn't wait to find me. "Rocky, you really have sunk so low," he mocked. I gave him a faint glance, equally unyielding. "Are you saying that you regret that Miss Hailey chose me in the end instead of you? There is some pride in you. You always look down on me, so why do you come to make trouble for me? Do you still want to play both sides and think the whole world revolves around you?" Undeniably, Tony has a stunning face that captivates people at first sight. Because of this, he's popular with many customers. In fact, many people come to spend here just for him, just like Hailey. But he is arrogant and conceited, thinking that all those women are bound to him. Even if he puts on a proud facade, they only see him as different from others. Perhaps my words hit a nerve, and Tony, feeling embarrassed and angry, took a couple of steps forward and punched me in the nose. "Shut up. Do you think I'm as cheap as you? So now that you're with a rich woman, you think you're all that? Rocky, you're just like a woman, only good at pleasing others." Before Tony could finish, his raised hand was suddenly gripped tightly from behind. It was Hailey. I didn't know how long she had been there, or how much she had heard. Tony, startled and a bit nervous, glanced at her. "What are you doing here? If I hadn't come, how would I have seen this good show?" Hailey, disinterestedly, let go and walked to me. She took out a handkerchief from her bag and gently wiped the blood off my face, looking tender and gentle. "Tony, you still need to mind the owner when hitting a dog. You've bullied my little dog like this, so tell me, how should I punish you?" "No, it's not like that." Tony stiffened under her cold gaze and instinctively protested. "I was just warning him not to be too self-righteous." "Self-righteous?" Hailey raised an eyebrow. "Didn't I give you a choice back then? Your precious pride is worthless in my my eyes. Since you've repeatedly refused me, I can't keep holding on to you forever. With a disdainful glance, Hailey looked at Tony and said word by word, "Do you even deserve it?" Tony, embarrassed and angry, left. As soon as he was gone, Hailey's face returned to its usual coldness. "If he bothers you again, just tell me." "Okay." I bowed my head and answered softly. Hailey hummed in acknowledgement, glanced at me indifferently, and then left. I knew her words were meant for Tony, to crush his dignity and break his arrogance. Hailey is far from as gentle as she appears. From those two experiences alone, that seems to be her true nature. I shook my head, stopping myself from thinking further. I just need to play the role that satisfies Hailey. Who she likes and what she wants has nothing to do with me. Once I got into work mode, time passed quickly. Half an hour before I was about to get off work, Tony suddenly showed up again, accompanied by the department manager. "Rocky, you don't need to come in starting tomorrow," the manager said to me. I stared at him in surprise. "Why? Did someone complain about me?" Turning to Tony, I saw a mocking smile on his face, as if saying he had plenty of ways to deal with me. I clenched my fists, took a deep breath, and confronted the manager. "If I haven't violated any rules, shouldn't the manager give me an explanation for firing me without cause? Or are you just siding with Tony because he complained about me?" "Well, the boss personally introduced me to this job," I added. "Even if you're going to fire me, the boss should tell me personally." Quite sharp-tongued, the manager snorted. "Tony is right. If we keep you here, you'll eventually offend all the customers. Don't look at me like that. It was the boss's direct order to let you go. So, if you're sensible, we can still settle this month's salary for you. Otherwise, the threat in my words is clear enough." I clenched my fists, looking at the smug Tony. For a moment, I really wanted to go up and punch him without a care, but I couldn't do that, nor should I. He must have a powerful backing to act so recklessly against me, even having the boss on his side. If I really lost control and hit him today, he could make it impossible for me to stay in this city tomorrow. Even though Hailey is helping with my mother, this arrangement is temporary. I can't afford to gamble on that possibility, but I didn't expect that Tony wanted more than just making me lose the bar job. Being fired by several bosses for the same reason, no matter how stubborn or tolerant I am, I can't stay indifferent. When I found Tony, he was leaning on a woman who looked over 50, smiling obsequiously as he fed her drinks. I remembered this woman was the manager's second aunt, with 3 or 4 minds, a genuine coal boss. So Tony's support was her, which also explains why the manager stood by him, and why he had the audacity to both hang around Hailey and repeatedly reject him. I tightened my grip on the doorknob, suddenly reluctant to barge in. Instead, I took out my phone, carefully turned off the silent mode, and took several photos and a video of the increasingly oblivious couple on the sofa. After sending them to Hailey, I left the bar and went home. Just as I arrived home, Hailey called. "You did well on this matter. Once I'm done with my work, I'll definitely reward you." Hailey's tone was indifferent, and from her voice, I couldn't tell her attitude towards Tony, but as long as she doesn't let Tony get away with it, that's enough for me. Hanging up, I lay on the bed, constantly thinking about future plans. My education level isn't high, so most job opportunities are for lower-level labor. If Tony really continues to target me, I have no way to deal with it. Now I can only hope that Hailey will resolve this trouble soon. In the middle of the night, I was drowsily asleep when a phone call suddenly woke me up. "Where are you?" On the other end was Hailey's usual calm tone, but I somehow sensed that her mood might not be good. I sprang out of bed with a start. "I'm at home. Did you drink and need me to pick you up?" "No need. Just take a taxi to my place." Hailey, unusually, added, "I'll be waiting for you." "I'm coming right away," I replied, and the next second, I was already in the bathroom, washing up. I took my time getting there. An hour and a half later, I finally arrived at the familiar little villa. The door was open and the living room lights were off. I cautiously walked in, glancing around the room, and eventually spotted Hailey sitting on the small balcony on the second floor, drinking quietly. "Sister, are you unhappy?" I half squatted in front of her, rubbing my face against her hand in a flattering manner. "Is it because of those photos?" "I'm sorry, I just didn't want you to be deceived by Tony." Before I could finish my sentence, Hailey covered my mouth and whispered, "Shoo." She seemed amused by my reaction, her eyes curving into a smile. Her smile eased my previously tense mood, but the next moment, she continued, "What kind of reward do you want?" "What?" I was a bit taken aback. "What reward?" "Yes, the good dog did something significant. Don't you want a reward?" Hailey's voice was low and seductive. I hadn't expected. My small thoughts could fool Hailey, but I didn't realize she wasn't upset at all. I looked at Hailey's expression, confirming she wasn't angry before slowly shaking my head. I don't need any reward. Initially, I sent the photos to you with my own motives. I'm already flattered that you're not holding it against me. How could I dare to make demands? After a moment of silence, Hailey suddenly asked, "Do you know why I liked Tony back then? Because he's good looking and he knows how to please you?" I guessed, looking at Hailey. No. Hailey curled her lips into a smirk. What I said was filled with sarcasm. It's because he sees himself as so noble. On one hand, he's wallowing in degradation, while on the other hand, he tries to appear pure. I thought it would be interesting to break his pride and train him into a submissive dog. As she spoke, she gently traced my lips with her fingertip. But now, I think you seem more interesting than him. This wasn't just a hint anymore. I remained silent for a long time. Hailey didn't urge me, and only when my squatting legs went numb did I look up at her. "I understand. I'll be good." Hailey's gaze sharpened, like a snake watching its prey. Her cold stare sent a chill to my bones. "Good dog, carry me into the room." Since making an agreement with Hailey, most of her free time has been spent with me. "Today, I'll take you to a good place." Afterward, Hailey exhaled a puff of smoke, crossing her legs with a tired, indifferent demeanor, a stark contrast to the person who had been soothing me just before. I straightened my clothes, sat up, and looked at her. "Where are you taking me?" "You'll find out soon." She leaned in and patted my face, then turned and headed into the bathroom. Hailey is quite particular about cleanliness in some ways, so by the time she finished washing up and came out, I had tidied the room and quickly showered in the guest room downstairs. As expected, Hailey raised her eyebrows when she saw the clean room, touched my head, and pulled out a card from her bag, slipping it into my pocket. "Here's a little reward for the diligent good dog." "Thank you, sister." I smiled. After leaving the house, Hailey drove us to an outdoor hot spring. To my surprise, as soon as we got out of the car, we ran into Tony, who was also there with someone. The woman next to Tony, dressed extravagantly, was about the same age as Hailey. It looked like she was trying to wear all her gold and jewels at once. I couldn't understand why anyone would dress like that, but I couldn't help but stare a few times. "Do you like her?" Hailey's voice suddenly came from beside me, startling me. I quickly came to my senses and shook my head. "No, I was just wondering who she is." Hailey glanced over at them and said, "That's Serena, the little princess from the Sam family. I advise you not to be too curious about her. Her brothers aren't easy to deal with." Hearing this, I nodded repeatedly, promising not to provoke the little princess. But I was still curious about how Tony managed to ingratiate himself with her. "There's going to be a good show soon. We just need to watch from a distance." Hailey seemed to read my thoughts, smiling as she took my hand and led me to the reserved room. I never expected that the good show Hailey referred to would be Serena's brothers, along with a group of bodyguards storming into Tony's room. I watched as Tony was thrown out by the tall, muscular bodyguards, landing right at my feet. "Fancy meeting you here," I said with a smile, waving. "Rocky, it's you behind this, isn't it?" Tony, red-eyed and gritting his teeth, glared at me. "You must have done this because you can't stand seeing me well. Using such dirty tricks, don't bite everyone you see." "I didn't do anything." I spread my hands with a terrified expression. "It's your own fault, not my business." Tony, furious, pointed at me. You, but he couldn't articulate anything further. Before leaving, I couldn't resist adding, "Looking at you now, it's not easy to leave. How about I lend you a towel?" I glanced at him with a mix of exasperation and amusement. I had to admit that Miss Serena's taste wasn't very particular. Tony's physique was also acceptable to her. "You must be quite pleased seeing me in this state now." Tony clenched his fists. "Just because Hailey is interested in you? You don't even know how twisted she is. As a man, you should have some shame, but you're disgusting." Several minutes earlier, Hailey had stepped out to take a phone call. Otherwise, I'm sure Tony wouldn't have dared to speak like this in front of her. "I'm disgusted," I retorted. "How do you think you're any better?" I caught a glimpse of a shadow passing by outside the door, giving me confidence. "At least I'm clean, but as for you, shall I count how many customers I've seen with you? Oh, by the way, I almost forgot. During the time Miss Hailey pursued you, you even boasted to the manager about how easy it is to deceive women like Miss Hailey, who have money and are foolish. I remember your exact words. Women like her are clearly starved for love. As long as I win her over, she'll be like like a dog licking me. When I say east, she won't dare go west. I mimicked Tony's contemptuous tone from back then, not caring about his increasingly ugly expression. Rocky, Tony, enraged and humiliated, took a step forward, trying to strangle me, but I swiftly dodged. You must admit that you're far more disgusting than me, Tony, I sneered, finally letting out the grievances I had kept in for so long. Once I said this, even though Tony was still furious, he was able to regain his composure quickly. He knew he couldn't afford to offend Serena's family, and being caught by Serena's brothers would not end well. So he knew he needed to find a backer. Among all the people he knew, the only ones comparable to Serena's family were Hailey and the previous coal boss. But after the incident with the photos, the coal boss had been warned by Hailey and distanced himself. So Tony ultimately had to seek Hailey's help. Thinking for a moment, Tony immediately changed into an injured look, covering his chest and speaking weakly. Actually, I was deceived too. Rocky, you know me. I never intended to sell myself out. Those people were just playing around. You know how tough our line of work is. If I hadn't done that, the manager would have already turned me away. From the moment he started changing his attitude, I became vigilant. I thought he wanted to do something to me, but who knew he suddenly said this and left me confused. What's going on? Playing the emotional card? But that doesn't fit. If he's going to pretend, it should be in front of Hailey. Did he somehow notice Hailey hiding outside the door even though his back was turned? Before I could figure it out, Tony said directly, Rocky, I was wrong before. I shouldn't have insulted you like that. I was blinded by profit. I was always worried you'd take everything from me, which is why I targeted you everywhere. I apologize. I promise I won't do that again. I can introduce you to new jobs. All I need is for you to speak well of me in front of Hailey, so she understands my difficulties. I don't ask for her forgiveness, just a chance to see her once. So this was his real purpose, I realized. He must have known that if he showed up in front of Hailey, she would never listen to his excuses. That's why he came up with such a roundabout way. But his plan was a failure. What difficulties do you have? Let me hear it. Hailey came out from the doorway, walked up to Tony, crossed her arms, and looked at him coldly. Tony's face quickly changed colors like a spilled paint palette, turning blue and purple. He stammered for a while, but couldn't articulate any real difficulties. After all, those things were his own choices. He really looked down on Hailey at the time. Now, even if he regrets it, he can't come up with a good excuse on the spot. Can't come up with anything? Should I help you think of a reason? Hailey said casually. Tony, probably not expecting Hailey to say this, was momentarily stunned, thinking this was a sign of forgiveness. Just as he was about to smile and reach for Hailey's hand, Hailey coldly added, You don't think I'm really the kind of person you described, naive and rich, do you? Her merciless words shattered Tony's hopes. He looked at Hailey in disbelief. I didn't. I just stopped pretending. Hailey sneered and patted his face. You think the Serena brothers found this place how? Do you think Serena really had any interest in you? What do you mean? It means this was just a trap I set. Hailey shrugged, kindly giving him an explanation. You boasted that you looked down on my dirty money, so I wanted you to see just how impressive money really is. At the very least, it's enough to make you spin around like a dog. After saying that, Hailey ignored him completely, waved to me, and said, Let's go. I'll take you to dinner. Okay, sister. Before leaving, I even turned around to take one last look at Tony. He was still standing there dazed, his head lowered as if lost in thought. I had a vague premonition that in such a desperate situation, he definitely wouldn't give up easily. However, I had underestimated the abilities of the wealthy. Just as Tony was about to make a move, his plans were nipped in the bud. One day during a meal, I suddenly heard Hailey casually mention that she had just given a heads up in front of the Serena family, telling them about Tony's character. The Serena brothers had already planned to get him out of the country, and whether he lived or died abroad couldn't be guaranteed. I was stunned, my mouth agape, and it took me a while to regain my composure. I murmured, Is this how decisive wealthy people are? This is so different from what I see on TV, where villains keep bouncing around in front of the protagonist. Even though the protagonist has the means and status, they don't just deal with the villain once and for all. Instead, they wait until things get really messy before going on a rampage and forcing a happy ending. Watch fewer TV dramas, Hailey said with a sigh, tapping my head. Do you think people who manage a conglomerate are stupid? They don't deal with things because they find it amusing, but if they see too many grasshoppers wanting to jump on them, they will get annoyed. I nodded, somewhat understanding, and no longer cared about Tony's fate. I just knew he was being monitored by people arranged by the Serena family, and that was enough. Your mother is being discharged today. Aren't you going to pick her up? You should eat quickly. Hailey noticed my distracted state, Thinking I was still thinking about Tony, Hailey looked at me with a soft snort. I'll eat now. I quickly picked up my bowl and ate hurriedly. Slow down. I'll have the driver take a shortcut later. Don't choke. Thank you, sister. I've been with Hailey for a few months now. I must say, she treats me very well on a daily basis. Whether it's clothing, food, or living arrangements, she respects me greatly. If according to Tony's previous description, this would be called self-degradation, I'd say such degradation is not easily attainable by others, except in some areas. Hailey's possessiveness is a bit strong, her quirks a bit strange, and she can be quite unpredictable. She can be considered a perfect patron. After silently despising Tony, I suddenly looked up at Hailey and asked, "Sister, didn't you say you were going back to the old house today? I can just take a cab to the hospital later. You've already helped me a lot. You don't need to trouble yourself with this small matter. You'll come back with me?" Hailey said casually. "Oh, I'm not in a hurry. I told Grandpa I'd bring you back with me. It's just right for him to see." But Hailey didn't explain much further. I had no choice but to head to the hospital with this unease. After bringing my mother home and settling her down, we hadn't chatted much before we again nervously headed to Hailey's castle. As soon as Hailey entered the door, she first greeted Hailey's parents on the sofa, then led me to the garden. "Grandpa, I've brought him." The old man, sitting in a wheelchair, drinking tea and basking in the sun, turned his head at the sound. His gaze fell directly on me, making me stiffen all over. I didn't know where to put my hands. "So this is the guy you've chosen?" The old man's gaze was stern and imposing. Although it was a bottom-up scrutiny, I felt as though I was being dissected. My face flushed red, and I stammered, "Grandpa, hello? I'm Rocky." Not knowing Hailey and the old man's attitudes, I didn't clarify my relationship with Hailey, but I thought the old man couldn't possibly be unaware. Just as I guessed, the old man furrowed his brow and sneered, "Timid and obsequious, isn't he? Dare to act but not take responsibility?" I straightened my back immediately, about to speak, but Hailey preempted me by saying, "Grandpa." The old man, faced with Hailey's intervention, couldn't maintain his stern demeanor. He awkwardly pursed his lips and said in a muted voice, "So this is the young man you picked out with so much effort. I don't think he's anything special." I was completely baffled by their conversation. What does it mean that I'm Hailey's carefully selected choice? Well, his character is a bit soft, but that also shows he's obedient enough, Hailey said while rubbing my head, speaking to the old man. "All right, I've seen him. The rest is up to you." The old man, with obvious disdain, waved us off, giving us a dismissive gesture. "Then I'll take him and leave. We'll come back another day to have dinner with Grandpa." Hailey nodded as if used to it, then pulled the still dazed me back into the car. This brief meeting of less than half an hour had completely overwhelmed me. No matter how much I racked my brain, I couldn't make sense of it. In the end, Hailey couldn't bear to see me puzzled and kindly gave me an explanation. "I need a husband who is willing to come under my family, or more accurately, Hailey's family needs a son-in-law with a clean background. You just happen to fall within my acceptable range." I was shocked and flustered, but I'm not. Even when I first met you, I had someone investigate your background. Except for your mother, you have no other relatives. And from childhood to now, apart from me, you haven't had any messy relationships? Seeing my confusion, Hailey continued, "What Hailey's family needs is not a capable man. To be blunt, few people in my generation can match me equally. So, all I need is a sufficiently obedient husband. Besides, according to my research, you care a lot about your mother. With her as a lever in my hands, I'm not afraid you'll stir up any trouble." I opened my mouth, trying several times to say something, but I still couldn't get any words out. So this is why Hailey suggested I follow her. Although the words were harsh, I didn't find it too disgraceful to be called weak. After all, a family background like Hailey's is something I could never match even if I tried all my life. One must recognize reality. I just didn't expect that Hailey would propose marriage to me. Even though it's a marital relocation marriage, it's still advantageous for me. "Sister, can I ask why it's me?" With Hailey's conditions, finding someone more obedient and better than me would be easy. It's not that I'm self-deprecating, but such a windfall would leave anyone a bit dazed. "Of course, it's because you satisfy me very much." Hailey smiled and pinched my earlobe, with a hint of suggestion in her squinted eyes. "Good dog." I shivered all over and promised, "I won't let you down, sister. It is often said that youth doesn't appreciate rich women. enjoyment, mistaking sweetness for treasure. To encounter a top-tier rich woman like Hailey is something many dream of. Even hesitating for a second would be a waste of a great opportunity. Well, good dog, why don't you hurry up and carry me to the room? Hailey lazily leaned back on the sofa, waving her finger at me. I obediently knelt before her and gently lifted her up. We lay on the bed, quietly closing the door. The end.